Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia Channel. The book that this program interprets for you is the classic book Influence by Robert Cialdini, the godfather of influence. Since it was published in 1984, it has been on the bestseller list of the New York Times 3 times, and has also been included in the 75 must-read books for business recommended by Fortune magazine, and one of the 100 must-read books for life identified by Amazon. Middle. Influence is also a bibliography recommended by two investors, Buffett and Charlie Munger, to shareholders. Since its publication, it has been translated into more than 40 languages. For nearly 40 years, it has always been a bestseller worldwide. Why can this book get so much attention and have such enduring vitality? And what are the 7 principles of influence in the book? When we use these principles to influence others, how can we avoid being influenced by others? After reading this book, you will find the answer. The topics discussed in the book Influence are closely related to each of us. I don't know if you have the feeling that in our daily work and life, many of our behaviors or choices are not consciously decided by ourselves, but are coerced by an inexplicable force. For example, originally I just wanted to stroll around in the mall, and after I realized it, I had already bought a lot of goods, or I was always unconsciously attracted by popular attractions, and queued for hours to check in, or I didn't want to go to the gatherings, the trends that I didn't want to catch up with, and the tasks I didn't want to accept. In the end, I still didn't hold on and chose to obey. This book tells us that the reason why people often have such unconscious obedience behavior is because, in an environment flooded with massive information, obeying others can help us reduce the cost and risk of screening information and making choices. After entering the internet age, the information we receive every day has exploded, and submissive behavior like this has become more and more common. However, when we talk about this phenomenon, we do not intend to criticize it. It can be seen that what it actually reveals is an instinct of human beings, which is difficult to change. After understanding this instinct, the next step we should think about is how to better use it for our own use. This influence discusses this issue. The book talks about the 7 principles of influence, and each principle is actually a trigger point for obedient behavior. Understanding these principles can not only help us gain insight into the influence from the outside world that is trying to coerce us, but also help us better release our own influence and achieve the desired results. In recent years, you may see that there are many books or courses on the market that discuss similar issues. However, many ideas or discussions about how to influence others and how to avoid unconscious compliance can actually find their roots in this book. The author of this book, Robert Cialdini, is a professor of psychology and marketing at the University of Arizona, and also works in other universities such as Stanford University. Home. He not only established his own workplace influence consulting company, served many Fortune 500 companies, but also used his professional knowledge related to influence to help Obama win the hearts of the people in the presidential election that year. And this influence brings together his research results in the fields of negotiation and psychology related to influence over the past 30 years. The book was first published in 1984. In the original version, the author talked about 6 principles of influence, namely liking, reciprocity, authority, social proof, consistent commitment, and scarcity. We will talk about these later. In the new upgraded version in 2021, the author has added a new principle of influence called alliance. We will also focus on the content of this part of the update. In addition, in the new upgraded version, the author has also made an important change, that is, according to the goals that can be achieved by the 7 influence principles, they are divided into 3 categories. The first category is to establish a friendly relationship with people, because if the other party has a good impression of you when you send a message to the other party, then he will be more likely to accept your information. The second category is to reduce uncertainty sexuality, that is, to make the other party firm in his mind that it is wise to accept your message. The third category is the last step, which inspires action. Having said that, you can also feel that these 3 types of principles are aimed at different stages of releasing our influence to the other party. Taking actions according to these stages can gradually let the influence enter from the relational level to the information level, and then to the practical level. In the following interpretation, we will also classify and explain the 7 principles of influence in the book according to these 3 stages. Before explaining, you can pause for a few seconds and think about what effect you most want to achieve through the principle of influence, then focus on understanding the type of tools you need most. First part. Principles of influence used to foster relationships, liking, reciprocity, and alliances. Let me talk about the principle of preference first. It means that if a person has already fallen in love with a certain person or thing, it is easy to love the house and crow and gradually accept related concepts, products, and so on. So, the influence triggers here are those people and things that you like. For example, the author gave an example. We all have a feeling that products recommended by good friends around us will be more trustworthy and worthy of purchase. Interestingly, a survey by a professional company shows that once close people become annoying, for example, after a breakup, the former partner becomes an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend, then the trust in their recommendations will also be greatly reduced. If it is shown by data, it is even 66% lower than the comments of strangers on the internet. For another example, the book mentions that a very popular Star Wars movie was released in 2016 called A Star Wars Story, Rogue One. Immediately afterwards, the sales of a joint SUV called Grand Rogue under Nissan Motor also soared by nearly 50%. Also, some studies have found that some stores are labeled as deals, but the prices are not cheap at all, but we are still likely to buy them. This is because we have bought really cheap and affordable things before, so these experiences are automatically associated with the deal visual label. This makes us subconsciously think that the goods in front of us should also be more cost-effective. These examples reflect the influence triggered by people or things that people like. There is also a principle called reciprocity, which means that if we get some benefits from others, we will also psychologically want to repay them. This is the case for two main reasons, the authors explain. The first reason is that after we get the benefits from others, we will have a sense of indebtedness, which will weigh heavily on us like a stone. We unconsciously want to get rid of it. The second reason has to do with general social norms. We subconsciously think that once someone takes advantage of others and does not know how to be grateful, he will be rejected by the social group and considered an ungrateful person. This is an implicit social pressure. That's why the principle of reciprocity works. And its trigger is very simple, that is, some small favors imposed beforehand. For example, in life, we are often invited to try new products at the entrance of the cake shop, receive free snacks and drinks when waiting for a table, get a small gift before filling out the questionnaire, and so on. These are actually improving people's cooperation through the principle of reciprocity. The book also talks about a real business case. In 2013, there was a general strike of bus drivers in Boston, USA, which caused great inconvenience to citizens' travel. So, Uber rented out the bus altogether, promising to provide free transportation to all public schools in the city. It might seem like a bad deal, but it turns out that Uber's ridership in Boston has improved dramatically since the favor was given. This is largely because it triggers people's reciprocity psychology. Well, after talking about the principle of liking and the principle of reciprocity, let's talk about the principle of alliance. This is a new and upgraded version of this book that has spent a lot of space focusing on a new principle, so we will spend a little more time here. In fact, the core of the alliance principle is very simple. In one sentence, it means that people will be more obedient to those who belong to the same group as themselves. The same group mentioned here means having a relatively unified identity, such as family, nation, country, political background, and so on. According to this standard, people will automatically divide other people into two groups, us and not of us. Those who belong to the we group can get more trust, recognition, and more cooperation. This phenomenon has been clearly explained in neuroscience research. The study found that the brain circuits that mentally represent the concepts of self and intimate other are actually the same. In other words, as long as the neurons of one concept are activated, the neurons of the other concept will also be activated. Therefore, we will subconsciously distribute our trust in ourselves to those who we think are the same concept. Group of people. Having said that, it is obvious that the key factor that can trigger the principle of alliance is the identity generated in the group. A more succinct term is used in the book, which is called sense of alliance. So, what brings about a sense of alliance? Behavioral scientists have found that there are two main factors. One is called unity of body and mind, and the other is called unity of action. Unity of body and mind can be achieved innately, because it will be produced through common blood and geographical commonality. To put it bluntly, you are more likely to have this sense of unity of mind and body with your relatives who are related by blood and fellow villagers who have lived in the same homeland. Of course, the same is true for distant relatives with overlapping genes, as well as between people in the same country or region. If you underestimate this mind and body sense of alliance, you may even suffer a large loss. In 2008, the famous American Madoff Ponzi scheme defrauded investors of tens of billions of dollars. Among the tools used by Madoff to attract investors in the early stage, one very important thing is this sense of alliance of unity of mind and body. We know that the Ponzi scheme is to use the money of new investors to pay high returns to old investors, create the illusion of making money, and then defraud more investment. In the old Chinese saying, it is to tear down the east wall, filling the western wall or white wolf with empty gloves. In 1919, speculator Charles Ponzi used this deception to collect money on a large scale, and then it was exposed, which gave it the name Ponzi scheme. The Madoff Ponzi scheme that shocked the world on Wall Street in 2008 lasted for more than 20 years, thousands of investors were deceived, and the amount of fraud was as high as $65 billion. How did Madoff succeed? Regarding this issue, there have been various analyses, some starting from the weakness of investors' thinking, and some focusing on specific fraud methods. Today's influence can provide us with a new dimension of interpretation, that is, the common identity within the alliance. Madoff was a Jew, so the Jewish community is the most important category of victims in the Madoff fraud case. He made full use of the trust generated by the sense of alliance of mind and body, looking around for Jewish investors who share a common identity, and then convinced them that if they invest with this professional insider, they don't have to worry about making money at all. The problem. Later, through the introduction of acquaintances, more and more Jews fell into the trap one after another. Therefore, in the circle, Madoff's fund is also known as the Jewish fund. By the way, the perpetrator of the Ponzi scheme, Charles Ponzi, was an Italian immigrant. And a large part of his hunting targets are his fellow Italians. What I just mentioned is the sense of alliance brought about by the unity of body and mind, which relies on innate blood relationship and regional commonality. The second factor for the sense of alliance mentioned by the author is unity of action, which mainly comes from the acquired experience of joint action. For example, it has long been recorded in archaeological and anthropological research that all human societies once had concerted actions, such as collective singing, dancing, praying, chanting, holding ceremonies, and so on. These activities are not just for the purpose of cultivating sentiment or taking a formality. They have a very important role, which is to strengthen the sense of alliance of the participants through common action experience, so that they can believe from the bottom of their hearts that I belong to this group, I am the same kind of person as the people around me, we are in the same group. We can see many examples of creating a sense of alliance through unity of action. They can serve many different purposes. For example, when people in a working group have just met, they often organize activities and complete some sports projects for collective cooperation, which is to make subsequent communication and cooperation smoother. In addition, we will see that when some companies release new products, they must rent a venue for tens of thousands of people to display and explain on site, and also broadcast live online simultaneously. These are for the people who live and watch the live broadcast to establish a common belief in this product, so that the product user base can radiate to more people. In addition, some companies hold group meetings before the launch of large-scale projects, give mobilization speeches at the meeting, and even ask everyone to shout slogans together. After the project is over, they will call everyone to cut cakes and celebrate success. The energy of cooperation, let's attack the city together. There is such a sentence in the book, which is used to explain the power of unity of action, which is in place. It says, when people act in unity, they are truly united. And when you believe that you belong to a certain group, you unconsciously project your trust on this group, then it will be easier for this group to exert influence on you. So far, we've covered the 3 principles of influence used to foster relationships: liking, reciprocity, and alliances. You will find that these 3 principles are actually arranged in order according to the one-way, two-way, and multi-way relationships. You see, liking refers to letting others like someone or something unilaterally. Reciprocity refers to an equal exchange between two parties. The final alliance involves more subjects, which means that people will submissive to other people in the same group, so it belongs to a multidirectional relationship. In general, what these principles tell us is that if you want to influence a person to the greatest extent, you must first establish a relatively close or friendly relationship with him. Because, when you send a message to the other party and release your influence, if the other party has a good impression of you, or feels that you have received favors from you, or feels that you are of the same kind as you, then he will be more likely to accept your information. Influenced by you. But at the same time, if we are not the sender of the information, but the receiver of the information, then we must also be vigilant whether someone is using these principles of influence to push us to act in compliance. The book also gives some coping suggestions. For example, if in a transaction scenario, the other party offers us some discounts at the beginning, we can accept them generously, but if he then makes another request, then we have to consciously strip out the previous discounts. It is up to you to evaluate whether the request itself is worth granting. Another important principle is to separate the person making the request from the request itself emotionally. That is, you may like the other person very much, or feel that the other person is the same person as yourself, but when the other person makes the request to you sometimes, you must consciously do a separation of topics and remind yourself to make decisions only based on the request itself, and don't transfer your feelings about people to things. The second part. Now that we've covered nurturing relationships, let's move on to the next category of influence principles, reducing uncertainty. Why might less uncertainty influence others to comply more easily? This, the authors say, is because we are most likely to believe that others are right when the situation is unclear and we feel uncertain. The others mentioned here can be divided into two categories. The first category is an authoritative person, which corresponds to the authority principle in the principle of influence. The second category is social group portraits, which are the most people in society in our minds, which corresponds to the principle of influence, the principle of social proof. Let's start with the authority principle. Many times, people tend to think that authority figures have more knowledge and power, and following their opinions should be a wise choice. This actually reflects that we are subconsciously looking for a shortcut to thinking for ourselves. And along this shortcut, we will choose to believe the views of authority figures. Moreover, the authoritative person here is not necessarily a real authority. As long as he has a sense of authority, it will be easier to conquer others. An example is given in the book. The author said that there was an advertisement that impressed him very much. This is a TV ad for a cough syrup. As a drug, it naturally needs professional information to convince the audience. The cough syrup ad, however, is not a real doctor, but an actor who once played the doctor on the hit TV series, a role that was popular with audiences at the time. The content of this advertisement for cough syrup is very simple. It is to let the actor pretend to be a professional doctor and introduce the benefits of cough syrup to a young mother. In the end, the ad was a huge success and sales increased significantly. So you see, even if the audience clearly knows that this person is just an actor who has played a doctor, it still does not prevent the product from selling like crazy. The key reason for this lies in the sense of authority possessed by actors. The main source of this sense of authority is the audience's association with the roles played by the actor and the medical plots in TV dramas. In addition to role associations, things like titles, clothing, and additional identifiers can also superficially create a sense of authority for a person. The authors argue that by designing these surface elements, it is easier to gain trust, if not substantively, that an authoritative identity is genuine. Therefore, in the author's opinion, the real authority status, as well as the superficial authority characteristics, can be the triggering factors of the authority principle. Therefore, the author also suggests that, from the perspective of the information receiver, if you want to protect yourself from the negative influence of authoritative influence, then you need to ask yourself two questions when facing some so-called authoritative speeches. The first question, is this authority a true expert? This can divert our attention from those ostensible characteristics of authority to the real evidence of his credentials. The second question, is this expert telling the truth? This requires us to consciously listen to some different professional voices, and not to make a conclusion based on just one person's words. After talking about the principle of authority, the next principle we want to talk about is social proof. The principle of social proof holds that if we want to persuade someone to do something, we just need to prove to him that there are more people doing the same thing. This is easy to understand, because people subconsciously think that following the majority of people to make decisions, the correct rate will be higher. In response to this phenomenon, the book quotes an intriguing quote: "When people are free to act, they tend to imitate each other." This sentence comes from Eric Hoffer, an American mass movement leader. What it wants to express is, mutual imitation among people does not necessarily come from the persecution of others, but it is an active choice that people tend to make in a free state. This principle, applied in the commercial field, has become some of the marketing methods we often see. For example, specially arrange people to applaud during the performance, contact various media experts to promote products, limit the passenger flow in the store, let the waiting customers line up at the door to attract attention, and so on. The effectiveness of these marketing methods also reflects the principle of social proof to a large extent, because they all allow people to see that many people are making the same choice, and then unconsciously join in it. However, when we are in a social group, not only action is contagious, but inaction is also contagious. For example, the book mentions a phenomenon that when a victim is in urgent need of help, although there are many people coming and going around him, or there are many onlookers, no one is willing to stand up and help him. In the past, we would have seen this group indifference as a lack of justice. But if we look at it from the perspective of social identity, we will have a further understanding of this phenomenon. For bystanders, the moment they discover the victim, they usually don't know exactly what's going on. Therefore, out of human instinct, they have to qualify the situation before they can take action, but, when there are many people, people tend to observe other people's reactions before deciding their next step. Therefore, when bystanders observe that no one around them comes to help, they will subconsciously think that they should not stand alone and help. Then, from the perspective of the help seeker, if we want to break this deadlock, we must take measures to let the bystanders break away from the state of social identification. For example, studies have suggested that if you are in an accident and there are people passing by who can ask for help, the best way is to point out a specific person from the crowd as much as possible to help. At this time, you can temporarily put down etiquette, stare at him, or point to him directly and say, "The little brother in blue, please call an ambulance for me," as long as you clarify the identity of the helper. Identity, the probability of being rescued will also become higher. In addition, back to the principle of social proof itself. If we have recognized the existence of the principle of social proof and realized that we don't want to be influenced by the actions or inactions of other people, or the so-called majority. So, first of all, we must be alert to those fake social evidence. You must know that the behavior of a few people or a group of people you see cannot represent the entire social group. In addition, the most important thing is to realize that our decisions should not build on how other people do it instead of following our own inner voice. The third part. We have already covered two types of influence principles. The first category is the principles used to cultivate relationships, including liking, reciprocity, and alliances. The second category is principles that reduce uncertainty and make it easier for people to obey, including the principle of authority and the principle of social proof. You should have noticed that when we talk about it, we first talk about why these principles can promote the realization of influence from the perspective of the influence sender. Then we talk about how to guard against or crack these principles. Next, we still follow this line of thinking to talk about the third type of influence principle. Compared with the previous two categories, the third category of principles is more conducive to directly motivating actions, so the author summarizes them as principles that motivate behavior. There are two in total. One is the principle of consistent commitment, and the other is the principle of scarcity. First, let's talk about the principle of consistent commitment. It works because the deep-seated desire to do what we say we do becomes an important driver of our actions. There are even times when people keep their promises in order to maintain a consistent personal image, even at their own expense. For example, the book mentions that in the United States, some toy manufacturers have a strategy to boost sales. Just before Christmas every year, a very attractive new toy is designed, and then advertised on TV. Children will ask their parents to give themselves this toy at Christmas. However, the toy dealers are playing a trick here. They will only release a small amount of this new toy in the market, while releasing a large number of other toys at the same price. In this way, many parents cannot buy new toys, but can only buy a toy of the same price as a gift for their children. January and February after Christmas are usually the lowest period for toy sales. At this time, the scheming that the toy dealers had planted before came into play. They started advertising that new toy on TV again. When the kids see it, they run to their parents and say, "You promised. You promised." In such cases, the parents are usually reluctant to spend the extra money to fulfill their previous promises. In this way, it supported the sales volume of toy manufacturers in January and February. In the commercial field, there is another way to use the principle of consistent commitment, called door threshold, which some companies will use to establish customer relationships. Specifically, first do a small business with a customer in a very favorable way, even if you lose some money yourself, it doesn't matter. Because this small business is not for profit at all, its real intention is to build a commitment with customers. After the customer agrees to the small request this time, after purchasing the product, the possibility of agreeing to a larger request next time is higher. In the end, they will upgrade each other's business interests step by step, just like stepping on the threshold. Now let's look at another principle of influence that helps inspire action: scarcity. The authors propose that the fear of something is more motivating than the desire to acquire it. And scarce things will make people feel that things are rare and expensive, and if they don't get it, it is their own loss. This increases the value of an item in people's eyes and makes people want to own it even more. With the principle of scarcity, we can also explain some seemingly irrational behaviors in business. For example, there is a classic case about the Coca-Cola Company in history, which happened in the United States in 1985. Time magazine called it the worst marketing fiasco of the decade. That year, Coca-Cola decided to update its formula and launched a new Coke to replace the original product. Unexpectedly, it aroused the anger of fans, leading hundreds of thousands of Coke lovers to unite and call for new Coke nationwide. Restock the old Coke. However, what puzzled the executives was that launching a new flavor was not a hasty decision. They had spent 4 years conducting a taste comparison test on 200,000 people in 25 cities. New Coke did have a 10% higher preference. You see, the number of samples is not low, why the final result is the opposite. Coca-Cola itself is having a hard time figuring out why. Later, the author Cialdini stood up and said that the only key to solve this mystery is the scarcity principle we are talking about. At the stage of taste testing, new Coke is a scarce product and has not yet been sold publicly in the market. People can't wait to try it first. At the same time, because of this freshness, most people think that new Coke is better in taste. But once the new formula is on the shelves and the old formula is out of the market, the scarce object is replaced by old Coke, and based on this principle, old Coke has become people's favorite again. Therefore, the trigger of the scarcity principle is a signal that something is becoming scarce, or even disappearing soon. The book pointed out that this scarcity signal can not only be reflected in quantity, such as the common hunger marketing, but also in the scarcity of certain elements. For example, time is a scarce element. Especially some sellers who like to put pressure on sales, they will release various signals, telling you that if you want to buy at a low price, this moment is the deadline, and after this village, there will be no such store. For another example, the characteristics of a product can also become a scarce element. For example, Dyson has applied for more than 1,000 digital motor technology patents for their products. This advantage has helped Dyson successfully win a unique and huge influence. In short, scarcity includes two manifestations of quantity and elements. The fundamental reason for the scarcity principle to work is the future loss that none of us wants to face. At this point, we have finished talking about the third type of influence principle, that is, the influence principle that can inspire action. So as usual, we still have to look at what we should do if we want to resist the influence of such principles from the perspective of the recipient of influence. We can see from the book that one of the most basic methods is to go back to our original heart. For example, we originally promised something to others, but later, others told us that the external conditions had changed. The author suggests that at this time, we should ask ourselves, If we have grasped the current situation and returned to the moment when we made the promise, would we still make the same promise? This can help us resist the situation where someone uses promises to kidnap us. For another example, the product that was added to the shopping cart before was suddenly reminded that the stock was short. At this time, do not place an order in a hurry, but go back to the moment when you added it to the shopping cart and ask yourself why you added it to the shopping cart at that time, and why did you add it to the shopping cart? Why didn't you buy it right away? Like this, before taking action, press the pause button and take a few minutes to look back at the heart, which can help us calm down the momentary high emotions and avoid rash decisions under impulse. The above is the essence of the interpretation in this influence. Now, let's review the 7 principles of influence. In this book, the author divides the 7 influence principles into 3 categories according to the purpose they can achieve. The first category consists of the principles used to foster rapport, including liking, reciprocity, and alliances. The second category is the principle of reducing uncertainty and making it easier for people to obey, including the principle of authority and the principle of social proof. The third category is the principles used to motivate action, including the principle of consistency of commitment and the principle of scarcity. These 3 types of principles are aimed at the different stages in which we release our influence to the other party. Taking actions according to these stages, we can gradually let the influence move from the relational level to the information level, and then to the practical level. In the explanation just now, we first talked about why these principles can promote the realization of influence from the perspective of the influence sender. Then we talked about how to guard against or crack these principles from the perspective of the influence recipient. Because each of these principles is a double-edged sword, which can not only help us influence others, but also allow us to be influenced by others unconsciously. Therefore, we understand these principles not only to grasp the fast channel to release influence, but also to raise our vigilance and guard against the use of people with intentions. As a best-selling book first published in 1984 and republished in 2021, this influence reveals the most fundamental psychological principles about why people are influenced by the outside world and why unconscious obedience occurs. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.